from IGF Bali. Well, this is the official logo of Internet Governance Forum, 8th Internet Governance Hub Forum, which was held between 22nd and 24th in Bali. And it came, as you know, in a rather delicate moment of the overall internet governance, in so-called AS after Snowden era, where many issues are open and discussions are very delicate on the future of the internet governance in general, and I'm sorry, and the question of the privacy and data protection in particular. Today's webinar is organized the following way. I'll provide 15 to 20 minutes introduction, summary what's happened in the IGF, at least from my perspective, and after that we can engage in discussion. You can ask the question, write the question in the small window which well, you already started using. IGF Bali happened in this dynamic period of emergence of the new IG geometry, as it is indicated in this drawing, with shift of internet governance on the vertical line towards high politics. We had a digital policy at the August meeting of UN Security Council, and as you are familiar, it was one of the topics at the UN General Assembly. Brazilian president raised the question of internet surveillance in her speech. And there is also a shift. There are now a series of meetings, London, Budapest, Seoul, series of meetings on cyber security. And that's a clear shift of emergence of internet governance into sort of diplomatic Premier League of high politics. On the horizontal side, you can notice broadening of the IG agenda beyond the Internet Governance Forum and covering the internet governance issues from different perspectives of trade, intellectual property rights, culture, human rights, cyber security, sustainable development. But there is this extension of digital elements brought into other traditional diplomatic issues. So we can notice this emerging IG geometry, and I mentioned the question mark is how IG is going to position in the future, and what will be the future role of the Internet Governance Forum in this emerging geometry. And I highlighted three elements which will be important for the future of the IG and the IGF. First, evidence-based policy making. Second, inclusiveness. And third, attempt to create some sort of policy coherence. So this is the general setup or general geometry in which Internet Governance Forum was held. Now I will give you the few outputs, and they're fresh. They're sort of the first presentation from Diplo's lab. We processed the transcripts of the Internet Governance Forum, and there are a few conclusions. One first is that governments were relatively quiet in Bali. If you follow carefully these lines, you can see that the government yellow line had a high presence in Bali. You can see it here. While they made very few statements, there is a big discrepancy between these two lines, and they participated with a relatively modest number of words in overall text corpus of IGF Bali. In the same time, you can see the relatively low presence, physical participation of, for example, academia, and high percentage of academic input into the statement and discussion of the IGF. The same applies to NGOs, 12% of the presence, then almost 20% of the participation in statements and text corpus. It reminds me of the time of the VUSIS, where governments were testing the ground of the emerging field of internet governance, and they were basically quiet. They were in the wait and see mode. And we are now facing a similar situation. There are tectonic shifts in digital politics, and governments in Bali, at least based on my impression, and these statistics confirmed that impression, were less talkative than in the past. They were basically trying to see what is going to happen in this decisive moment, especially after Snowden revelations. Like it was one of the important insights and conclusions from the value. Then we did the preliminary survey of the most frequently used words in the IGF 2013 transcripts, and you will be surprised that for example, Snowden is on the 395th position. Surveillance is not among first 200 words, and those are some of the content-related words. The data is relatively high, the highest one, and then you have security and access relatively high on this list of the most frequently used words. We are currently working on the detailed analysis of the transcripts, and hopefully in a few weeks' time we will have insights about more insights about the overall participation and the way how the discussion was conducted. Rights, where are the, yeah, well, I'm sorry, you're correct. Ginger just mentioned that the rights are higher than security on the list. Yes, thank you, Ginger. From analysis of transcripts, we should get more insight, and this is our small contribution towards evidence-based policy making, or at least evidence-based reflections on the IGF and multi-stakeholder process as one of the important topics at the IGF. Now, there were three main issues at the IGF Bali. The first one, as we can expect, was internet surveillance. The second was Brazil ICANN initiative, and third was IG institutional architecture. Good news for the IGF is that there were no elephants in the room, or there were no holy cows, there are no red lines. The discussion was very open, and thanks to the initiative of Raul Echeverria, supported by Marcus Kummer and MAG, we put the internet surveillance and the question of the Snowden PRISM issues on the agenda. And it was also mentioned in many interventions, many discussions, as one can expect. Let me reflect briefly on the main findings, or at least my impressions from discussion on these three topics. The first is internet surveillance, and I co-moderated a session on internet surveillance, and I think that there are three elements. There are some points where there was a clear consensus, sort of consensus, and lack of consensus on the question of what to do, what can IG internet governance do in this on this issue. There is a clear consensus that internet surveillance triggered a serious crisis in internet governance, generally speaking, and that it undermined trust as one of the main pillars of internet governance. And there is the urgent need to find a way out of the current situation. And that was confirmed by almost all panelists that attended the internet surveillance panel, including the US government, Google, civil society, and the other players. There was a sort of consensus that emerging that we have existing rules, and this is also part of a US cybersecurity strategy, that existing international law should be applied to the internet-related issues. And in existing treaties, there are provisions, for example, Article 17 of the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and Privacy Protection. I think that there was lack of consensus, or it wasn't clearly spelled out how to implement existing rules on privacy and data protection. Should we introduce stricter reporting mechanism of the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights? Should it be part of the, for example, universal periodical review? Should we aim for some sort of protocol on Covenant on Civil and Political Rights? Is the way out to introduce some sort of self-regulation by internet industry, plus supervision of implementation of those rules adopted by internet industry by public institutions? There are various ideas, and I think that the most of the creative, political, and intellectual efforts will be directed to finding the way how to implement existing rules. I won't be answering the question now. I will go later on to the question, and then we will have a Q&A session. The second issue was Brazil ICANN initiative within the broader IG context. Now, I just brought the drawing which I made on my flight from Bali to Geneva. I tried to explain to one colleague interested in these issues what is the current situation. As you can see on this this drawing, you have on one side multi-stakeholder approach, on the other side you have intergovernmental approach, and in between you have a zone of possible agreement. There were two major developments. First of all was a move of Brazil in September towards towards one can say intergovernmental side by cancellation of the visit of the Brazilian President Rousseff to Washington and the statement in General Assembly. But after that, it was a clear move, especially after the Brazil meeting between Brazilian President and CEO of ICANN, was move towards some sort of zone of possible agreement built around this ICANN Brazil initiative. On the left-hand side, we have also move of the technical community, whose position, which position was to the large extent aligned to the business community. But after Montevideo Declaration, technical community led by ICANN moved closer to the zone of possible agreement. And now we have this initiative as a possible way out with, I would say, very simplified way, agreement built on the idea that ICANN can bring the technical business community in the United States in the possible, we can say, deal an agreement that should be made hopefully in Rio in 2014, while Brazil can add this intergovernmental part and persuade the governments that that arrangement that should emerge in Rio could be formula for the future of Internet Governance Forum. Now, I think that this could be a very important development and useful way to come out of the current Internet governance crisis. And generally speaking, those are two important players. Brazil is probably the state with the highest, let's say, ranking and in the field of Internet governance, a continuous promoter of the Internet governance approach, strong supporter of multi-stakeholderism, but also a country which has strong development credentials and realistic approach to protection of public interest and multilateralism. On the other side, we have ICANN, which received a new dynamism with the new CEO, and who brought great hopes that the future arrangement could be made and ICANN can be reformed. The timing is also good, not only because of the Snowden crisis, but also the ICANN's CEO is gradually finishing honeymoon at his new position, and he will have to deliver some sort of concrete results when it comes to the institutional arrangement, future institutional arrangement. Therefore, there are good ingredients for preparing something interesting in Rio in May. The summit, IG summit, is scheduled for May 2014. Now, let me put my sort of skeptical hat and indicate a few limitations. The time for such a complex deal that should sort out future of the Internet governance is not sufficient. There are less than 6 months, and there are very, very sort of there are controversial points, and time is needed to persuade the various actors to come into this zone of possible agreement. Therefore, I would give a chances for the great success of this initiative approximately 60% to 40%, with mainly time being the weakest element, available time in this process. But Rio Summit and Brazil ICANN initiative could be a building block towards reaching something more permanent later on in 2014 or in 2015, when we will revisit the conclusions of the World Summit on Information Society 10 years later. This is now the first major second major development. And third development, or third main issue discussed in Bali was institutional architecture. It was linked to the Brazil ICANN initiative, and there was a high prominence of, for example, multi-stakeholder partnership in the IGF agenda. There were 15 workshops with the multi-stakeholder in its title, and we counted about 40% of workshops were dealing with issues related to institutional architecture. My general impression, and now I'm just highlighting this is an impression, this is not an informed decision, I have to study transcripts and to go through that, we had more of the same, all discussion and arguments that have been used around the discussion of the institutional architecture. The main development was wait-and-see approach and to see what can bring a Brazil ICANN initiative. There were a few trends. There's a strong push on the Internet principles as a way to influence also the question of institutional architecture. And there were quite a few indications about the need to have more evidence on multi-stakeholder partnership. Does it work? What are strengths, what are the strengths, and what are the weaknesses? Those were the three main developments. Personally, the main insight, which is good news for IG, happened during the so-called e-squatting. For those of you who have been attending the IGF, you know that approximately 50% of people in the room are browsing the net and doing something back home, although they're physically present at the workshops and events. And I found one of the rooms with excellent Wi-Fi, and I was sitting there, and the workshops were passing. I was doing some work back with preparing a few events that Diplo was organizing. And suddenly, when I was sitting and doing my work, I also developed technology to approach to switch off from the current discussion. I started hearing words like persuasion, negotiation, listening, engagement. I looked into the program and I realized that the workshop was very technical. It discussed the peering arrangement, the technical arrangement. And then I got engaged and I followed the discussion, and it was really fascinating. You had geeks, technical people, basically discussing internet governance in very comprehensive way by having a clear understanding about the potentials of technology, clear understanding how to use the data in order to create, to develop informed policy, and what is the most important, clear understanding of the limitation of the our inputs and our attempts to create completely rational solutions. It addressed one of my main concerns, which I experienced in the past attending the similar events by technical community, which was arguing that basically give us enough computer power and we will sort out social problems. Here, these people had real high responsibility and a lot of wisdom in addressing IT issues, and it inspired me to write one of the blog posts focusing on that. Therefore, it was a good news from my e-squatting in at the IGF Bali. In brief, it was a very productive, pleasant event with a good in-depth discussion and open discussion. Therefore, there were no issues that were not supposed to be covered. Personally, it was a great experience, and I'm sure that all of you who were there share that aspect, my impression about the success of the IGF. Now I will go quickly to the questions that you already posed. In the meantime, please add your comments and questions in the chat window. Okay, we have a question. I will read the questions and then try to provide the comments. Now I have this privilege to use the voice communication. You will have to type. Sarah asked, what can be done to encourage government participation? They are an important stakeholder. I agree, Sarah, they are probably in this current situation, let's say, more important stakeholders than others, because the governments have to to be proactive and to contribute to the development of internet governance space. I think their relatively low-key profile was related mainly to highly politicized discussion about the internet surveillance. This is a sensitive issue for many governments, and their approach was to see what's going on and to not to be really proactive in the workshops and sessions. Fatima, question, how many people talk in other languages than English in the focus session? Good question, Fatima. We'll pose this question to our language lab, and they will provide an answer very soon. Then Ginger, Sarah, excellent point. Sarah, government participation gives legitimacy as much as civil society and other stakeholders. Everyone has to be there. Completely agree. Dee was there in the BBC News today. Google and the Q are both incensed about surveillance carried out against them. This is a new aspect. It seems that they will have really complex map of surveillance. Vladimir, Fatima, my impression was that only very few folks decided to talk in their native languages or of the UN. Most of them, in fact, in order to remind about the multilingualism rather than they needed to. There should be many, many more. Well, I think I got it right, Vlada. Vlada, I had the same impression, unfortunately. From Amrita, question, what was the view of the BRIC nations on privacy and data protection vis-a-vis US or English view? Well, this is good, extremely important question, Amrita. My impression was that especially question of privacy was not in the focus of, for example, Asian countries, at least based on my contact with Asian diplomats and people coming from Asia. The question of data protection and data storage and basically data as a commodity of the new economy was raising more interest among diplomats and people from the region. That was an impression about Asia. About BRICS, Brazil puts the question of privacy and human rights high on its agenda, even in the statement of President Rousseff in the General Assembly. Russia was absent from IGF, except few representatives of the academia. I didn't notice the presence of the officials from Russia. India as well. I think that India had a much higher profile during the last IGF in Baku. This time, I didn't notice a high presence from India. China participated in a few focus sessions and made their comments, but I don't think that we had any major development and major inputs when it comes to Chinese participation. South Africa, which is a new BRICS, was not at least official part of the South African delegation was noticeable in Bali. Do you have a question? I remind people in the decade meeting that those who spoke Indonesian Balinese were disabled during the Bali meeting. Okay. Hanan, in your opinion, what would be the ideal format of ICANN Brazil Summit to be really distinct from other forums where policy issues are discussed? Well, Hanan, we try to prepare simulation exercise on addressing the simulating Brazil Rio Summit, and we will run the simulation exercise over the next few months. The main challenge is that the Rio Summit has to come with very concrete outputs. It should be a Rio Declaration on future of the internet governance. And when you have to draft the output concrete document, it requires much more solid structure, including drafting committees and working groups. And probably that is the way how the architecture should be built, around the drafting working groups representing various stakeholders. That is recognizing the 6 UN languages, but in practical terms, there will be many participants who are local language speakers. Thank you. Ilona, will NGO have a real voice in constructing IG institutions? Now, Ilona, generally speaking, this is the multi-stakeholder approach, or I will risk to call it multi-stakeholderism, is challenged now, especially after the general Snowden-related developments. The United States has been a strong supporter of multi-stakeholder approach, and there are now many questions about the overall approach. Although in the official statements you cannot find it, but there is a strong criticism of multi-stakeholder approach from some governments and circles. Now, one has to really acknowledge and to be open in discussion on the achievements of this approach, and those achievements are major over the last 8 IGFs. And one has also to address and approach multi-stakeholder in the view of the realistic contribution to our IGF discussion. We cannot exclude some stakeholders like Google and Yahoo and Facebook from discussion of internet governance. Whatever we would agree will have a limited implementation and application in the future of internet governance. Now, since we are discussing more and more question of values like trust, especially after the Snowden revelation, the role of civil society will be extremely important. Therefore, there is a need to develop a new approach to multi-stakeholder partnership, which is based on practical necessities, not just on the general statements. Predrag Tasevsky, why security is the least frequent word and why cybersecurity is not mentioned at all. Cybersecurity was one of the topic focus as well. Predrag, the list is long. This is just the first 15 words. Therefore, security qualified on the top of the list. And you're right, cybersecurity was not as present as it was, for example, in Baku. This is also based on our just analysis of titles of the workshops. The main issue in Bali was question of institutional arrangement and the multi-stakeholder approach. And cybersecurity was surprisingly low on the overall agenda. Kita from ITU, in one of the daily summaries, you mentioned the US put freedom of expression and security in the forefront, both now on the equal level, it seems. Could you elaborate a bit on that statement? Yes, that was the way how the US officials were commenting on the question of internet surveillance, highlighting the need to establish right balance between security requirements and need for surveillance in the field of the security and observation of the human rights, mainly privacy protection. Therefore, that was the main argument that there is a risk that that balance could be tilted in one or the other direction, in another direction. Therefore, that was the main message, that there is a need to preserve that balance. Fernando, of all the organization forums, which one has come closer to proposing a sustainable model for internet governance? Well, Internet Governance Forum is the place which is still the only place that address internet governance in, as Bill Drake likes to indicate, in a holistic way. Therefore, the discussion on the Internet Governance Forum was quite comprehensive, but I would say the IGF has a definitely leading role in discussing, not proposing, because it is not decision-making body, by discussing the institutional framework. Fernando, in which of the various areas of internet governance has been achieved more consensus? Well, one can say that there is a consensus that we have to do something. Therefore, the old principle of global diplomacy of inertia and evolution has been challenged. Therefore, something has to be done, because status quo currently is very, very risky. It can endanger the basic pillars of the internet as integrated global system. Therefore, something has to be done. That was a clear consensus at, I would say, all panels. Francine, any new decision about mobile user personal information tracking on smartphones? There were no decisions at the IGF Bali. It's no decision-making body, but I'm sure that quite a few workshops discussed that issue. Fernando, do you think IGF will be extended? This is an interesting question, and one of the possible scenarios which was discussed in the corridor diplomacy in Bali was that Brazil ICANN initiative could be the building blocks towards, let's say, IGF 2 or 3, 3.0, or IGF plus, mainly related to introducing some decision-making elements and conclusions. But I have to admit that that was part of the sort of corridor diplomacy. Fernando, of all the organization forums, which one has from closest to proposing that was answered? Vladimir, my impression is that the IGF 2013 had relevant discussion with high-level speakers, yet few participants. 2014 IGF is in Turkey, same year when there is the ITU development conference, Brazil ICANN in spring, ITU plenipotentiary, all these possible bringing documents. IGF probably not. How do you see IGF role importance in 2014 and beyond, deciding, declining or strengthening? Well, there are two scenarios. One is that the IGF will be strengthened and it will receive some sort of a decision-making element, not decision-making on concrete issues, but maybe in identifying issues that should be addressed by other organizations. We use the metaphor that IGF may become the waiter in the nice global internet restaurant, which will take the orders from different organizations or different stakeholders and bring that orders to the kitchen, to the specific organization, international organizations, non-governmental bodies, which will create the rules, decide, introduce the regulation, and report back to the IGF. That could be one element in IGF plus. Now, if IGF does not evolve, the current situation, the risk of status quo, will probably trigger the search for some alternative fora or space which can perform the function of the Internet Governance Forum. Predrag, why security is the less frequent word? That was answered. The key of this question to Vlada. Well, you see, I assist Vlada in this respect. Fernando, of all the organization forums, well, I'm getting the same question. In which of the various areas of Internet governance has there been more consensus? It was answered again from Fernando regarding Brazil summit in 2014. Do you think a governance of Internet governance meeting is needed? Well, governance. This is a bit confusing, Fernando. If you can provide more details. Ginger, Jovan, you mentioned that you were surprised that Snowden and surveillance were not part of the discussion. What do you think was the largest topic at IGF Bali? Well, I was surprised when I went through the analysis of transcripts where the Snowden is below 300 on the top, the most frequently used words, and I had a feeling, impression, and this is why evidence that it was more prominent in discussions in Bali. But this is why we need the data and we need the evidences, and we can then compare them with our impressions and get the more objective view of the reality, including what was discussed in Bali. Definitely, Brazil ICANN initiative was the most prominent during the IGF Bali. But again, I have to double check my impressions comparing with the evidence that we can find. It was the most prominent, definitely, Brazil ICANN was definitely the most prominent in corridor diplomacy, in discussions over the 40 and Bali. Fatima agrees with me, thank you. What about others who were in Bali? Do you agree that Brazil ICANN was initially was the most prominent part of discussion in corridors? Stephanie, Jovan, the Brazil ICANN initiative started off as a summit. During IGF, it was described as just a meeting, as it being downplayed by any of the parties. Excellent question, Stephanie. I think that there was a question of managing expectation about the Brazil ICANN initiative. First, I would say ICANN slightly more, but both players addressed this real need to find some sort of way out of the current situation. And they were very enthusiastic, and they were even used the term summit. Now, when the discussion started, including consultations with civil society and other players, and when details were discussed, all involved realized that the whole exercise will be quite complex. And it requires a lot of time, it requires a lot of energy, diplomatic engineering, engagement. One could probably draft an interesting statement or resolution, Rio Summit resolution. But what is important is to engage all partners and to have some sort of buy-in and ownership by all players. And it will require more time than it was thought initially. And I would say that the excitement about the initiative was triggered to the large extent by really need to do something urgently. Now, that time component will be important. And I think the reason why even in the choice of the title from summit to conference, the reason for downplaying is basically related to the managing the expectations. Ginger, interesting point. One main topic is session possible, another in the corridors. That's always the difference that exists in those meetings, especially when you have such a nice place as the Bali International Conference Center. Vladimir Fernando, point 4, I think he pointed to the abundance of the emerging discussion for everywhere cyber. That's correct. Cyber conference Brazil ICANN. Should there be some kind of governance of all of these processes? Well, that was one of the comments, but I will quote one of my colleagues who said that everything has to be said by everybody, everywhere. And this is probably the truth for internet governance. Now, the issue was discovered by politicians worldwide, and they have to make statements on it. And we can expect mushrooming of the initiatives and meetings, and it is a problem because there is a need to establish some sort of coherence and to establish some sort of coordination of these efforts, because there is a cost involved in hosting so many parallel meetings. Bill Drake, it wasn't just Brazil ICANN, but the assembling of the coalition platform that absorbed the most energy inside meetings. That's correct. That was, thanks Bill for this comment. It took the reflection on the reaction to Brazil ICANN meeting, triggered quite a few developments with the technical community, civil society, and many players started developing their platforms and approaches in order to deal with this new initiative. And I know that Bill was quite involved in this process. Fernando, rephrasing regarding Brazil Summit in 2014, do you think there is an overlapping of internet governance meetings? What are the positive and negative aspects? Well, as I indicated previously, there are too many meetings, and one can count 4 or 5 parallel initiatives, and I'm afraid that we can expect a few more initiatives. There is opening, there is a need to do something, and it is quite tempting for politicians worldwide to try to become part of the history. And this is, I would say, negative aspect. Positive aspect is more awareness and the sort of realization that there is a high political importance of internet governance and the way how the internet is managed. This is a positive side of the overall process. Hopefully, Internet Governance Forum will be strengthened, and it will become again the place which can absorb even in this high politics, because Internet governance performs quite important function, and it is successful. But with this challenge of moving to the high politics, there is a need to strengthen Internet Governance Forum through political declarations, through the references, and also through strengthening of the structure of the IGF. I'm always almost shocked and definitely surprised when I learned how many things are accomplished by the very tiny secretariat, and that's really amazing. I think that it's not sustainable. IGF has to be strengthened both politically and organizationally. Shaila Rao, Mystery, can you comment on human rights aspect? Was it taken with serious, and did we make expected progress? Shaila, I think that human rights and generally the question of values, I would extend it to the beyond the human rights, was prominent in the IGF. It was, I would say, the least technical meeting. The people realized that there are some core values of the internet and internet governance that are challenged, that the trust depot has been diminishing, and that we have to address the question of values. And in this context of the question of values that should be promoted, human rights issues featured prominently. I would say two types of the human rights issues. On one side, you have the question of freedom of communication or freedom of information, which is a traditional IGF topic, and on the other side, data protection and privacy, which emerged after the Snowden revelation more prominently in the overall IG discussion. Fatima, do you think that the IGF had less young participating than other IGF? That's a good point, and I'm now trying to think about my visual impression. I noticed quite a few young people, especially locals from Indonesia. But probably Secretariat can tell us what was the sort of age structure of the IGF. What is your impression, Fatima? And one of the, I would say, problems or positive aspects in the same time of the IGF was that the conference center was very big with many facilities, and it wasn't easy to grasp the overall IGF, let's say, population at one place, except probably the gala dinner, which I unfortunately missed. Okay, Fatima's impression is that less young people participated this year. Thank you, Fatima. Vlada Youth, there were some brought by APC and some brought by ISOC, but not that many. In fact, many more were expected to come. I know from other organizations, but there were no funds. Funds for fellowship are generally missing. Yeah, this is important, and we at Diplo, we are facing it. There were three of us, Vlada, myself, and Dio over there. And you can recall the Diplo had in the past big delegation. The question of funding for the IGF is becoming quite a serious challenge. Ginger, I noticed that we want the demographic breakdown of participants, but we don't want anyone collecting our data. How can we have both? That's a good question. Hanan, you are right. Jovan, thank you, Hanan. The size of the venue had an impact on me personally, following up with what was going on. Well, the architecture shape and always shapes our experience, and I felt very comfortable at the Bali Conference Center, but at some points it was too big to grasp the general dynamics of the meeting. Good. It seems that we exhausted. Yeah, somehow we kept feeling that there were fewer participants over than in previous years. Fernando, what were the hottest topics, the novel topics, and the oh my God, not again topics? Good question, Fernando. Well, all issues related to the Snowden, question of data protection, big data, privacy, profiling, were really new, not completely new topics. Some of them were discussed in the past, but they got a new relevance during the IGF. I would say that the overall discussion on multi-stakeholder approach was could be partially labeled as what you said, oh my God, not again. We had the marshalling or more or less the similar arguments and similar positions. I didn't find even from academic community that many novel approaches or data supporting the views which are just normative views, what is good or what is bad with multi-stakeholder partnership. Personally, I try to avoid those sessions. Vlada, one possible, oh my God, not again, was spam. Worth thinking if this was one with new relevance or not. It was dominant topic within cybersecurity sessions. This is interesting, but I didn't notice it. Therefore, spam reemerged. I thought that spam completely disappeared from the IGF agenda. It was very prominent at the first IGF in Athens, but for example, 2 years ago, there were no any indication about spam in the program. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you. That's a good point. This is how the life in the internet politics gets strange turns. That's correct. It was mentioned. It was an issue at the WCIT in Dubai, and this is the reason why it reemerged again at the IGF agenda. Yep. Fatima, and now we have interesting, she said, comments to Steph. My impression is the meeting won't have a real impact on the IG ecosystem. Fatima, are you referring to the Rio meeting? Question for Fatima. I suppose you're referring to the Rio summit or Rio meeting. Okay. Yeah, that will be interesting development. We will follow closely preparation for the Rio summit, and diplomatically speaking, it will be huge challenge, and it will be also huge challenge in managing expectations, which were at one point very high. And in diplomacy, as Marcus, who is today with us, one of the most experienced IG negotiators, could confirm is that managing expectations is extremely important in moving the discussion towards fruitful conclusion. Thank you for your comments and questions, and I learned quite a few new things, including an interesting journey of spam back from complete irrelevance via WCIT Dubai back to the IGF in Bali. Well, I hope that we have managed to map, generally speaking, what were the main developments in Bali, what were the main formal outcomes, what was the atmosphere in Bali, in corridors and overall discussion, and what we can expect in the forthcoming period, especially with regards to Brazil ICANN initiative. We will host webinars and discussions on the future developments in the field of the IG, and I'm inviting you to join us and also to propose the specific angles that we should cover in those webinars. I hope I don't qualify for this statement, oh my God, again. I try to be as sort of innovative as possible. Thank you for your patience and good questions and comments. Fernando, yes, I don't know if we are going to provide, I think we have technical facility to provide the transcript. We are not as advanced as IGF. Thanks, Fab. Have a nice day or afternoon. Oh, Lara, I can see that we have some quiet participants. Lara, we missed you in Bali.